I evicted my parents on a Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic the way people imagine. No shouting, no police, no suitcases thrown onto the lawn. Just a printed notice in a white envelope slid across the kitchen table while the kettle screamed itself dry in the background. My mother stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. My father didn't look at it at all. He looked at me instead, eyes narrowed, like I'd finally confirmed something he'd always suspected. "You wouldn't," my mother said softly. I had already done it. But to understand how I got there, you have to go back to a house with beige walls and a refrigerator covered in my sister's achievements. Growing up, I learned early that love could be measured, not in hugs or bedtime stories, but in receipts. My sister Lila was the golden child. She didn't have to try very hard. The glow followed her anyway. When she brought home a B- in math, my parents blamed the teacher. When I brought home an A, my father would squint at the paper and say, "That class must be easy." At 10 years old, I asked for piano lessons. My mother smiled apologetically and said, "We'll see next year." 2 weeks later, Lila announced she wanted a horse. Not riding lessons, a horse. There were conversations, spreadsheets, late-night whispers behind their bedroom door. By spring, there was a brown mare in a rented stable with Lila's name stitched onto a pink saddle pad. At the dinner table, my father would pass the best cuts of meat toward Lila without thinking. When I reached for the bread, my mother would say, "Careful. That's for tomorrow." The message was always the same. Resources were limited, unless they were for her. Money was the quiet language of our house. We didn't talk about it openly, but it shaped everything. When Lila wanted to go to a private high school, my parents found a way. When I asked about college visits, my father said, "Community college is practical. You're practical." I worked after school from the day I was legally allowed to. Stocking shelves, cleaning offices, tutoring kids who reminded me of myself. I saved every paycheck in a shoebox under my bed. Lila never worked a day. My mother said she needed to focus on her potential. At 18, I got a partial scholarship to a state university. I remember standing in the kitchen with the acceptance letter shaking in my hands. My parents congratulated me, briefly. Then my father cleared his throat and said, "We'll need you to take out loans for the rest. We're stretched thin." That same summer, they co-signed a lease on Lila's downtown apartment so she could find herself before college. I didn't argue. I learned early that pushing back only made them colder. Years passed. I graduated, got a job, moved into a tiny apartment with thin walls and a view of a brick alley. I paid my loans on time. I built a life quietly, without asking for help. Lila bounced from interest to interest: photography, yoga instruction, a half-finished business selling handmade candles. Each time she stumbled, my parents caught her. When I was 28, my father called me one evening, voice unusually careful. "We're thinking of downsizing," he said. "The house is too much now." The house. The one I grew up in. The one that still smelled like lemon cleaner and old arguments. I offered to help them look at options, to run numbers, to figure out a plan. My father hummed non-committally. A week later, my mother called with an update. "We're actually considering something else," she said. "An arrangement." The arrangement was this. I had recently received an inheritance from a distant aunt. Nothing extravagant, but enough for a down payment. I mentioned it once, casually, over dinner. Now my parents had a proposal. I would buy a smaller house in my name. They would live there, pay what they could, and eventually, everything would even out. "It's practical," my father said when we met in person. He folded his hands the way he did when he wanted to sound reasonable. "You're good with money. This keeps the family together." I asked one question. Where would Lila live? My mother smiled too quickly. "Oh, she's figuring things out." I should have heard the warning in that smile. Still, I agreed to talk to a lawyer, to look at contracts, to be careful. Years of being overlooked had trained me to accept scraps, but I wasn't reckless anymore. I wanted clarity. We met at the kitchen table again, papers spread out between us. My father drummed his fingers. My mother kept glancing at the clock. They were impatient, eager to move forward. "This is just the beginning," my mother said, reaching for my hand. Her palm was cool. "You're such a good child. We're proud of you." It was the first time she'd said that in years. As I gathered the papers into a neat stack, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message notification. I ignored it, focusing on the sound of my father's chair scraping back as he stood. "We'll talk details soon," he said. "There's something else we need to take care of first." "What's that?" I asked. They exchanged a look. Quick, practiced. "Oh," my mother said lightly, "just some paperwork." I didn't know then that this was the moment everything shifted, that the word paperwork would come to mean something very different. That somewhere, already signed and filed, was a decision that would change all of our lives. I picked up my coat, feeling a strange, creeping unease settle in my chest. If I had checked my phone right then, I might have known what was coming. But I didn't. The betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, the way cold does. Quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore once it settles into your bones. A week after that kitchen table meeting, my mother called me while I was at work. I could hear traffic in the background, her voice pitched too bright. "We've made some progress," she said. "Your father and I met with someone today." "Someone?" I asked, swiveling slightly in my chair, already uneasy. "A financial advisor and a realtor. Just preliminary things." I frowned. "I thought we agreed nothing would move forward until everything was clear. Contracts. Terms." There was a pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. "Of course," she said. "This is just information gathering." Information gathering turned into momentum. Suddenly, every conversation assumed the arrangement was inevitable. My father emailed listings. My mother sent photos of cozy kitchens with captions like, "This would be perfect for us." Every time I tried to slow things down, they brushed past my concerns like they were dust on a shelf. Then Lila called. She hadn't spoken to me directly in months. When I saw her name on my phone, my first thought was that something was wrong. "Hey," she said, breathless. "Mom told me about the house thing. That's amazing." "Is it?" I asked carefully. "Yeah, I mean, it's smart. You always were the responsible one." There it was, a compliment shaped like a box. "Where are you living right now?" I asked. "Oh," she said quickly. "I'm between places, but Mom said it'll all work out soon." Soon. Another word that started to itch. That evening, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. The porch light was on, and through the front window I saw my father sitting at the dining table with a stack of papers. Lila was there too, perched on the edge of a chair, scrolling on her phone. They all looked up when I walked in. "You didn't say you were coming," my mother said, forcing a smile. "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. My eyes went straight to the papers. "What's that?" "Just drafts," my father said too quickly, sliding them into a folder. I didn't sit. "Drafts of what?" Silence stretched. Lila glanced at my mother, then back at her phone. My father exhaled. "We didn't want to burden you with details yet." "That's funny," I said, "because this entire thing is my burden." My mother stood and reached for my arm. "You're overreacting." I pulled back gently. "I want to see the papers." Another look passed between them. Finally, my father opened the folder and slid one document toward me. It wasn't the whole thing, just a page, dense with legal language. I scanned it, my stomach tightening with every line. "This says co-occupant with transfer rights," I said slowly. Who's the co-occupant? My mother cleared her throat. Lila. I looked up. Why? Well, she said, eyes darting, it makes sense for her to be included. For stability. For her stability? I said. What about mine? My father's voice hardened. Don't be selfish. That word landed like a slap. I flipped the page over, searching for dates, signatures. This isn't what we discussed. You said I'd own the house, that you'd pay rent, that nothing would change without my consent. This doesn't change ownership, my mother insisted. It just ensures family continuity. By giving her rights, I said. Rights I don't have over your current house. Lila finally looked up. Why are you making this such a big deal? She asked. It's just paperwork. The same word again. I gathered my bag and stood. My hands were shaking now. I need time. I'm not agreeing to anything until I review all of this with my lawyer. My father stood too, taller, angrier. If you walk out now, don't expect us to wait forever. I met his eyes. Then don't. For 3 days, no one contacted me. On the 4th, my lawyer called. I've reviewed the documents your parents sent over, she said carefully. There's something you should know. My heart thudded. They sent them already? Yes. And there's an addendum. Dated last month. Last month. Before the kitchen meeting. Before the smiles. It outlines a contingency, she continued. If you purchase the property, a trust activates after 12 months. The beneficiary is your sister. I couldn't speak. She would gain controlling interest, my lawyer said. You would retain financial responsibility. The room felt suddenly too small. So I'd pay, and she'd own it. Yes. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. That evening, my mother finally called. We need to talk, she said. Your father's upset. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. You planned this before you even asked me. She didn't deny it. We were protecting Lila, she said softly. And sacrificing me, I replied. She needs us. So did I said. All my life. There was silence on the line. Then my mother said, You're being dramatic. That was the moment I knew, not just that they had crossed a line, but that they would never admit it. What I didn't know yet was that they had gone further than contracts and trusts. And that the proof of it was already waiting for me. I didn't confront them right away. That surprised even me. For days after that call with my mother, I moved through my life like I was underwater. Sounds came muffled, faces blurred. At work, people talked and I nodded, answered emails, attended meetings. But everything felt unreal, like I'd stepped out of my own body and left a version of myself on autopilot. At night, though, the truth sharpened. I lay awake replaying every conversation, every practical suggestion, every time my parents had praised my responsibility as if it were a resource to be mined. The betrayal wasn't just the contract. It was the planning, the timing, the fact that they'd decided my role without my consent, and without a flicker of guilt. Still, something didn't add up. The trust documents were damning, but they felt incomplete, too careful, too sanitized. Lawyers didn't write with the casual cruelty my parents had shown in person. There had been something else at play, something decided long before they ever sat me down at that kitchen table. The thought wouldn't let me go, so I did something I'd never done before. I went back to their house while they were away. I still had a key. My mother had insisted I keep one in case of emergencies. The irony didn't escape me as I let myself in, the familiar click of the lock sounding louder than it should have. The house smelled the same, lemon cleaner and old furniture. For a moment, I stood in the entryway, heart pounding, feeling like a thief in my own childhood. I'm just looking, I whispered to no one. My parents weren't careless people, but they were creatures of habit. Important papers went in two places: the filing cabinet in my father's study and the old fireproof lockbox in the hall closet. I started with the filing cabinet: manila folders, tax returns, insurance policies. I flipped through methodically, forcing myself to stay calm, to breathe. Halfway down, I found a folder labeled Estate Planning. My hands went cold. Inside were copies of documents I'd never seen. A will, recent, signed and notarized. I sat down heavily in my father's chair and read. It was written plainly, efficiently, assets listed, accounts named, and then the distribution. The house, their house, was to be transferred entirely to Lila. Savings accounts, Lila. Personal property of sentimental value, Lila. I scanned frantically for my name, my pulse roaring in my ears. There it was, near the end. To my other child, I leave the sum of $1 to avoid any claim of omission. $1. My vision blurred. I read it again, slower this time, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping there was another page. There wasn't. I laughed then, quietly, hysterically. The sound echoed wrong in the room. All those years of being told things would even out, of being praised for understanding, for not needing much, and they'd made it official, permanent, legal. They hadn't just planned to use me, they'd planned to erase me. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to storm out, to call them immediately, to scream until my throat gave out. But another part, the part that had learned patience through neglect, told me to keep looking. The lockbox was heavier than I remembered. I set it on the floor and opened it with the combination I'd known since I was 16. Inside were passports, birth certificates, old jewelry, and a small digital voice recorder. I stared at it, confused. My father had always been suspicious of technology. He barely tolerated smartphones. A recorder made no sense. I pressed play. At first there was static, then my mother's voice, clear as day. "She doesn't need to know," she was saying. "Not yet." My breath caught. My father responded, his tone tired but firm. "She'll figure it out eventually. By then it won't matter," my mother said. "The trust will be active. Lila will be settled, and she won't fight us." A pause. Papers rustling. "She always backs down," my father said. "She wants peace." My stomach twisted. "And if she doesn't?" my mother asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Then we remind her of everything we've done," my father said. "All the sacrifices." I sank onto the floor, the recorder slick in my hands. The date stamp blinked on the screen. 6 months ago. 6 months before they ever mentioned downsizing, before the kitchen table talk, before the smiles and praise and "we're proud of you." They'd planned it all. There were more recordings, short ones. Conversations about making it clean, about ensuring I'd be financially locked in, about how Lila deserved security because she was too sensitive for the real world. I turned the recorder off and sat there in the silence, my chest tight, my ears ringing. This was it, undeniable. Their voices, their words, their intentions laid bare. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, something very still settled over me. I copied everything, scanned the will, photographed the documents, uploaded the recordings to 3 different cloud accounts, sent copies to my lawyer with a single line of text: "We need to talk." Then I put everything back exactly where it had been. When my parents came home later that evening, I was already gone. For weeks after that, I said nothing. I answered their calls politely. I nodded through dinners. I listened as my mother complained about stress, as my father hinted that time was running out. They mistook my silence for submission. In a way, it was, but not the kind they expected. I wasn't planning an argument. I was planning an ending. And when it came, it wouldn't be private. It would be public. The day everything came to light began with an invitation disguised as a demand. My father called early in the morning, his tone clipped, businesslike. "We need to finalize the housing arrangement," he said. "Tonight. The family will be here. Lila too. Bring whatever you need." I stared at the phone, listening to the quiet hum of his breath. "All right," I said. "Tonight." He thought I was agreeing. He had no idea what I was bringing. Their house was unusually busy when I arrived. Cars lined the driveway. My parents, my sisters, and 2 sedans I didn't recognize. When I stepped inside, I realized what they'd done. They invited witnesses. Not for me. For themselves. An old family friend, Mr. Dalton, sat stiffly on the couch. He was a retired attorney my father admired. Next to him was my mother's cousin Janice, who loved inserting herself into family drama with the reverence of someone attending a ceremony. My mother greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You're late." I checked my watch. "I'm early." She ignored that and gestured toward the dining table, which was already set with folders and pens, like an administrative battlefield. Lila sat at the far end, scrolling through her phone. She wore a soft pink sweater, one that had always made her look younger, more fragile, more in need of protection. She glanced up at me, then quickly back down, guilt flickering across her face before disappearing under something more familiar: entitlement. My father cleared his throat. "Let's begin." I sat, slowly, deliberately. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. He pushed a packet toward me. "This is the final draft. We've been patient long enough. You either sign tonight or the opportunity is gone." Opportunity. That word almost made me laugh. I flipped through the packet. Pages whispering against each other. The trust. The co-occupancy clause. The transfer rights. All the things they'd planned behind my back, now dressed up as generosity. My mother leaned forward, voice syrup sweet. "Honey, we don't want tension. This is for the good of the family." "For all of us," Lila added, though she didn't meet my eyes. I set the papers down. Then I reached into my bag. My father exhaled, relieved. "Good. You came prepared." He thought I was pulling out a pen. Instead, I placed a small Bluetooth speaker on the table and pressed play. The room changed instantly. My mother's voice filled the space, echoing off the walls. "She doesn't need to know. Not yet." Mr. Dalton blinked. Janice's jaw dropped slightly. My father stiffened. The next line played. "By then, it won't matter. The trust will be active. Lila will be settled, and she won't fight us." Lila froze, phone suspended midair. My father reached forward. "Turn that off." I didn't. More rustling. My father's recorded voice. "She always backs down. She wants peace." My mother shot to her feet. "This is taken out of context." "Really?" I asked quietly. "Then we should listen to all of it." I let the next clip play, the one with the estate plan. I watched the color drain from my mother's face as her own voice filled the room. "Of course the house goes to Lila. She's the one who needs it. The other one can take care of herself." Janice inhaled sharply. Mr. Dalton, ever the lawyer, folded his hands and said nothing, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. I finally stopped the audio. The silence afterward felt louder than the recordings. My father was the first to speak. "You had no right." I cut him off, my voice steady. "I had every right. You were planning to financially bind me to a property I'd pay for while giving ownership to my sister. You prepared a will assigning me $1. $1. Lila shrank into her chair. "You don't understand," my mother began. "No," I said, leaning forward. You don't understand. You thought I'd stay silent, that I'd play the role you wrote for me, that I'd accept being used because that's what I've always done. I gestured toward the witnesses, but now they know, and everything is documented. My father's jaw flexed. You think this proves anything? Those recordings could be edited. Good, I said. Tell that to my lawyer, she has them already, along with the will, and the draft trust, and the emails, and the timestamps. My mother's face crumpled. You're twisting this. We were helping Lila. And hurting me, I said. Deliberately, systematically, for years. Lila finally spoke, her voice small. I didn't ask for any of this. I turned to her. But you accepted all of it. Every favor, every allowance, every sacrifice made on my back. She swallowed hard but didn't argue. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the pens. We are your parents. You owe us respect. No, I said softly. Respect is earned, but I do owe you something. They all looked up. I reached back into my bag and placed a second envelope on the table. This, I said, is notice. I'm withdrawing from the housing arrangement entirely. I will not purchase anything. I will not finance anything. And the next time you try to use my name or credit in any legal capacity, my lawyer will pursue action. My mother looked like she'd been slapped. You wouldn't? I met her eyes. I already have. My father opened the envelope with trembling fingers. As he read, his expression shifted, from anger to disbelief to something colder, darker. You're cutting us off. Yes, I said, financially and legally. Janice shifted uneasily. Mr. Dalton nodded once, as if confirming that my position was sound, but I wasn't finished. I stood. And one more thing. My parents looked up at me, eyes wide, faces pale. I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being the child you call when you need money, or stability, or someone to fix your mistakes. From this point forward, you handle your own lives. I held their gaze. I evicted you once. Don't make me do it again. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My mother reached out, tears welling. Please, don't leave like this. I stepped back. Goodbye. And then I walked out, leaving the quiet implosion of their plans behind me. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that the aftermath would be even harsher. Justice isn't a moment, it's everything that comes after. Justice didn't arrive with applause. It came in envelopes, court dates, and long silences where there used to be noise. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up expecting to feel something dramatic. Triumph, grief, relief. Instead, there was a strange calm. The kind that follows a storm when the air feels too clean, too empty. My phone was quiet. That didn't last. By noon, the messages began. First from my mother, long, rambling texts that swung wildly between denial and pleading. We never meant to hurt you. Families make mistakes. You've always been so strong. Why are you doing this to us now? I didn't respond. My father's message was shorter. You've embarrassed us. Fix this. I blocked his number. The legal consequences moved faster than I expected. My lawyer was calm, almost gentle, as she explained what would happen next. The recordings shifted everything. Intent mattered. Pattern mattered. And what my parents had done, what they'd planned, wasn't just unethical. It was actionable. The trust was voided before it ever activated. The estate plan was challenged successfully on grounds of coercion and bad faith. Assets were frozen pending revision. And then came the part no one had warned me about. The house. Their house. The one they were so sure would go to Lila. Because of the way they'd tried to involve me, using my finances, my credit, my inheritance, there were consequences attached. ones they hadn't anticipated, ones they'd never bothered to explain to Lila. They couldn't refinance. They couldn't sell without settling obligations first. And suddenly, the house they'd treated like a guaranteed legacy became a liability. That was when my father called from a new number. I answered once. "We're in trouble," he said. His voice sounded older, smaller. "I know," I replied. "We might lose the house." I closed my eyes. "You already chose to." There was a pause. Then quietly, "Can you help us?" The old reflex stirred, the urge to fix, to stabilize, to be the responsible one. I pushed it down. "No," I said. He hung up without another word. Lila tried next. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, eyes red, makeup smudged. She looked the way she always had when things finally went wrong, fragile, overwhelmed, expecting someone else to catch her. "They're blaming me," she said as soon as I opened the door. I didn't invite her in. "They always do," I said. She hugged herself. I didn't know it would go this far. I studied her face, the familiar one I'd spent my life standing beside, behind, beneath. "You knew enough," I said. "You just didn't care." Her lip trembled. What am I supposed to do now? I thought of all the times I'd asked that question, of all the times no one had answered. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You always said I was practical. Try it." I closed the door gently. The fallout spread through the family like a shockwave. Relatives called, some angry, some curious, some suddenly remembering injustices they'd once ignored. I told the truth when asked. Calmly, without embellishment. The story changed as it traveled, but the core stayed intact. My parents had planned to use one child to secure the future of another, and they'd been caught. Eventually, the house was sold. Not to Lila, not to me, to strangers. The proceeds were split in a way a judge deemed equitable. No golden child, no scapegoat, just consequences. I didn't attend the final hearing. I didn't need to. By then, the weight I'd carried for decades had already lifted. The strangest part was the grief. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd never had. I mourned the parents I'd hoped for, the fairness I'd waited for, the love that always came with conditions. I let myself feel it fully, for the first time, without trying to earn my way out of it. And then, slowly, I moved on. I bought a small place of my own, not to prove anything, not to save anyone, just for me. I painted the walls a color I liked. I filled the fridge without rationing. I learned what it felt like to make decisions without fear of punishment. Sometimes people ask if I regret it, if I wish I'd stayed quiet, if it would have been easier. Maybe. But ease was never the same as peace. The last time I saw my parents was by accident, months later. We passed each other on a sidewalk downtown. They looked tired, smaller than I remembered. My mother started to speak, then stopped. I nodded once and kept walking. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying them with me. And that was justice.